City of Eureka Planning Commission meeting, and we'll start with roll call on tonight's agenda.
Okay. When it finally lets me push buttons, sorry. Commissioner Meyer, Commissioner Benson,
Present.
Commissioner Freitas,
Present.
Commissioner Kraft,
Here.
and Commissioner Lazar. Thank you.
Okay, let's stand and salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to move right to item C, the approval of the minutes for January 9th, and perhaps we should do the approval of the meeting minutes of the 9th separate from the meeting of February 2nd, rather than doing them together, because some of us were not here for both of those. So
If
I was here for
you all
both.
don't vote, we don't have enough for a quorum, so
You can, accept them into the record even if you weren't at the meeting, which we'll have to
as nobody
do.
has any objections.
and can one abstain from the vote and still
No,
have it be
because
a
we
vote? So it
won't
has
have
to
a
be yes
quorum.
or no. Okay, I read them both, and I know how to vote. All right.
I was here for both and read them both, and I will move that we accept the January 9th meeting minutes.
And the February?
Okay, and the February 2nd special meeting minutes.
Okay, do we have a second to that? I'll second that motion. Any discussion about the minutes? Any revisions or changes or comments? Seeing none, let's go right to the vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. So moved. Thank you. Okay, well, this is the oral communications portion of the Planning Commission meeting, and this is where commissioners or the public have an opportunity to address the commission on any subject that's not on tonight's agenda. So let's start with commissioners. Is there any commissioner have something they'd like to bring up? Okay, let's move to the general public, first in the chambers and then online. Anyone online wishing to address the commissioners? Okay, we're going very swimmingly right along. All right, we're going to public hearings new. I'm not seeing any item for continued public hearings. And so the first item is Redwood Coast Fuels Petroleum and Petroleum Products Storage. I know there's a staff report for this, and so I'd like to turn it over to staff for this report. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Aubrey Richardson, and I'm an Associate Planner with Development Services Planning. Tonight, you will be considering a Redwood Coast Fuels Conditional Use Permit and Coastal Development Permit for petroleum and petroleum product storage. Here's a bird's eye view where the subject property is located in context to the city's limits. The applicant is proposing to relocate the existing business from its current location at 3134 Jacobs Avenue. A closer look shows the property is located west of the foot of Tomlinson Street. And the property is zoned general industrial and has a general industrial land use and is located within the coastal zone. The subject property is surrounded by a restaurant to the north, an existing mechanic shop to the east, a mobile home park to the south, and a city pump station to the west, including the Hickshari Trail and railroad right-of-way. Here's a picture of the site taken from Tomlinson Street facing west. The applicant proposes to store up to 28,000 gallons of petroleum and petroleum products in a 3,000 square foot portion of an existing 8,600 square foot warehouse space. The applicant also proposes to store 3 vehicles on site, 1 delivery vehicle, and 2 fuel trucks, which will be empty after daily operations. Here is a site plan. The existing building is comprised of 2 suites. We have Suite A and Suite B. The applicant will occupy 3,000 square feet of Suite B, and the remaining 5,600 square feet will be used for general storage of supplies. And Suite A is currently unutilized. The applicant has also proposed to install 3 on-site parking spaces and 1 ADA space, and a vehicle storage area to store 3 vehicles on an existing paved area when not in use. They are also proposing a new driveway which will connect the parking area to the foot of Tomlinson Street. The applicant has also proposed to install a new sewer lateral to connect the existing lateral on Tomlinson Street, and no exterior modifications to the building have been proposed. The 3,000 square feet storage area will be lined at floor level with a 3-inch angle iron containment berm to act as a perimeter barrier in the event of a spill. Petroleum products will arrive at the facility pre-packaged from the applicant's warehouses in Santa Rosa and Ukiah and will be transferred via forklift. The warehouse also has a 14-foot high and 12-foot wide roll-up door, and the trucks will back into the perimeter barrier while loading and unloading the products. As discussed in your staff report, staff believes the findings of approval can be made and recommends the Planning Commission hold a public hearing, adopt a resolution that finds the project is exempt from CEQA, and approve with conditions. 1 written comment was received and provided to the commission prior to the meeting, and staff has prepared a motion when the commission is ready. Staff and the applicant are available if you have any questions.
Thank you for your presentation. Let's bring it back to the commission for questions for staff. I have a few. So my understanding is that you're looking for us to vote whether this is exempt from CEQA and to approve the conditions. It seems to me, generally consistent with farsighted policy and the local coastal program and the land use plan and the implementation plan, and it appears that they're going to. The use is completely within an existing building. There's no additional construction other than the additional sewer lateral.
And the striping for the parking spaces.
Okay, all right. So, looking at the conditions, number 1, I was just curious, and I did read the letter that came from the Humboldt Bay Keeper Executive Director Jen Kalt. I always appreciate Humboldt Bay Keepers and keeping up with what's going on in town and making constructive comments. So thank you for that. And pursuant to that, I'm just curious if we understand that this is moving from Jacobs Avenue, which is a place that is even a higher level of risk for sea level rise, to a place that's still at some risk but a slightly lower level of risk. And but are there any other feasible alternative locations that are not in the tsunami zone or vulnerable to future sea level rise that were looked at by this particular applicant?
I can't answer the question on whether or not the applicant pursued an alternative site. I would defer that question to the applicant. However, general industrial uses are only allowed in the GI zone district within the coastal zone, and the hinge district in the inland zone. However, that hinge district is only about a block wide from 13th Street to 8th Street, and it's still within the tsunami zone and sits at a lower elevation than the current proposed site.
Good, thank you for that. My other question is there a protocol, since it is in the tsunami zone, for moving petroleum products in the event that a tsunami warning is issued? I know sometimes we get as little as 20 minutes to respond, but sometimes we get, depending on where it's coming from, as much as 36 hours. So is there some kind of a protocol for the moving of hazardous materials? Obviously, there's an evacuation plan for people, but is there also some ability to move hazardous materials when we know it's coming and have lead time?
So the tsunami plan that has been conditioned for them to submit prior to issuance of the building permit doesn't necessarily require them to provide a timeline on if they are going to be able to relocate the product. We only are requiring that they have an evacuation plan for people. However, and one of the principal planners can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you guys may be able to condition it that way. I'm not too sure if that's an option that you guys have.
My understanding of the conditions of approval as I read them was that there's an upgrade process. There's a requirement that a tsunami safety plan be created by the applicant, but I think it's not done yet. And so we don't have that to review as part of this approval. We know that one will be forthcoming in the future. I'd be inclined to favor requiring an advanced tsunami safety plan. I mean, I think the level of hazardous materials at this site, it might be prudent to see in advance what they're thinking of. You know, a 3-inch L bar is a minor, you know, secondary containment feature relative to what tsunamis can bring. So I'm just curious what they might think relative to that. But that's for commission discussion. I'd be interested to hear what other commissioners might think about that as well. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
I just had one quick one. What triggered the need for a new sewer lateral? Was that the applicant's request, or was it triggered by like the valuation of the project?
During the referral period, we sent this out to our Public Works division, and they weren't able to find an existing sewer lateral on this site. Therefore, they conditioned it or added the condition for them to install that.
Okay, thank you. That's the only question.
I have a few kind of easy practical questions. What does prepackaged mean when it comes to the product? Is that barrels or something else?
Yeah, so the applicant has indicated that the prepackaged items would be in like totes or barrels or those drums.
What was the noticing radius on this?
It was within our 300 feet buffer of the project site.
So that would include the Best Western and Seamus T-Bones or not?
Yes.
Okay. Interesting question was asked. This one's a little harder. An interesting question was posed by the Baykeeper memo on is there possibility to zone inland property that would be more appropriate for this kind of use. And I am not inclined to hold up this project on it, but I am curious about whether that's on the table, whether it's at all practical. I'm of the opinion we're going to really be forced to rely on fossil fuels for a while yet. Of course, there's the very large fuel depot not far away from this one. But to what extent are there other options at all? I mean, we talk a lot about we're built out. Okay.
Yeah. We are built out. Off the top of my head, I can't think of another location in town where this would be appropriate other than some already industrial zoned property.
That is,
We would be looking at rezoning residential to industrial in a lot of cases, since that's the largest part of our zoning in the city. The only other options would be mixed use zone districts. So you'd be in the downtown area, potentially west side of Broadway. But again, I'm not sure that any of those locations are one where you'd really want a heavy industrial type of use.
yeah. And in the current situation, it's kind of interesting with the patchwork of, the fuel depot with mobile home park and hotel and stuff. Do any of you know how much fuel is stored at the Chevron depot? I'm trying to put into context how much 28,000 gallons is compared to that. Okay, that was a hard question. I'm good, thank you.
Any other comments by the commissioners? Why don't we open it up to public comment then at this time? Anyone online wishing to address the commission on this Redwood Coast Fuels Petroleum and Petroleum Product Storage application? Anyone in the chamber? Yeah, it looks like there's a gentleman. Go ahead and step forward to the mic and you'll have 3 minutes to address us.
Thank you. My name is Alex Ziegler. I'm here representing Schneider Enterprises, the property owner. Just wanted to make myself known and make myself available to the commission. If you have any questions, I can provide any information. I'm happy to. In terms of your discussion and questions that you asked, I can do as much or as little as you ask or would require. Please feel free to let me know if I can be of assistance.
Why don't you stay there for just a minute, because we may have some questions for you. I do. I'm just curious relative to what kind of leaks might be expected to be contained by that secondary containment, the L iron, and what's the relative capacity of that 3,000 square foot area? I suppose I could do the math, 3 inches by times 3,000 divided by something, but does that seem adequate to you relative to what kinds of fuel spills are likely to occur even in a seismic event?
Sure. I would think that it would be adequate, certainly. I mean, the outside chance that every single containment vessel would rupture at the same exact time and fill up that amount of capacity, I think, is remote. Certainly, if there is a drastic or catastrophic event, whether it's seismic, whether it's tsunami related, I think that we probably got bigger problems in our hands than just this one particular project storage. I mean, if you look at all the industrial uses spread out throughout the area and across the entire coastline, Chevron terminal, however many uses there are around, something of that level threat would be something that we're looking at a much higher problem, much larger problem than just a specific site. I think that the condition that was placed for this 3-inch angle grinder containment was placed not by the applicant or by the property owner clearly, so whoever from the city staff came up with it, I think probably put some thought into the fact that it would be sufficient for any mistakes, accidents that might have happened.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant's representative?
Do you have a take on how many gallons are stored at the Chevron depot?
And just to clarify, I represent the property owner, not the applicant.
Okay.
In terms of the Chevron terminal, I know that it is vastly larger than 28,000. It is significant.
The barge that comes in apparently has 87,000 barrels of fuel when it
And
comes.
a barrel is 30-some gallons?
I think so.
Okay. All right.
And it comes twice a month, according to what I'm finding online.
I appreciate it.
That puts it in perspective, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Okay, let's bring it back to the commissioners. This is an allowable use within the coastal use plan. I don't see any red flags that make me feel that this is not ready for CEQA. I do appreciate the larger conversation and not holding this project hostage, but, as sea level rise, slow flood continues, at some point, we're going to need to, maybe it's not this commission, maybe it's not under our watch, maybe it's under the next watch. We're still looking at rates of sea level rise, but at some point retreat is, and rezoning, may be something that this commission and staff have to take, very seriously. Right now, it's still sort of political death to say retreat. People don't want to hear that. They want to see protect in place. But it was a very good question, Michael. So, other comments?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and kind of in that vein, I'm wondering, it's kind of interesting having this project and then the update to, our coastal land use plan coming in at the same time, because there's some of that, thinking obviously being done about how to relocate sites and how to, ensure that other, surrounding people are safe from potential hazards that uses could pose. So I'm wondering if someone on staff could maybe speak to that a little bit, and at what point they think we would need to reevaluate land use, because like you guys said, almost all of our heavy industrial land is probably going to be underwater. in the next few decades. So what's the plan? And should we start considering things like this as interim uses, and when? So I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I'm sure you guys have thought about it and talked about it.
Yeah. Eureka, we're hitting on probably our biggest issue, which is that a lot of our commercial and pretty much all of our industrial land is in the coastal hazard area. And we don't have other land where we don't have a West End road like Arcata, we don't have another location. So this could really affect our economy moving forward. But in this case, it seems that it isn't the slow hazard of sea level rise that's the issue, because you can always just relocate. It's more of the immediate hazard of a seismic event or tsunami wave. And to some extent, you can engineer your way out of that issue, not 100% with an existing structure, but with a new one. And we haven't gone so far in the draft update to require that beyond what the building code does. But we could consider it, and we could also consider things like a debris management plan, or more like holistic planning for what would happen in a big event and how we would recover from that.
I've read that this building is 1949, I think, if I'm correct there, and I'm just curious whether staff has started to look at buildings and start to get ratings about their ability to withstand a tsunami event of a certain size.
Yeah, the seismic hazard, I think it's the Seismic Hazard Act. Yes, they're working the geologic survey. Gosh, I can't talk tonight. Anyway, they're working on tsunami mapping and regulations, and they've gotten to the point where they're like mapping different probability tsunamis, and they're mapping flow depth and velocity for them. So we can go to a site, and you could do this now, but it would take an engineer doing this whole calculation. But in the future, we'll be able to pull up a map, hopefully in the next couple of years, and look at it. And once a wave gets over the spit and over the railroad berm, it could be that it's less than 3 feet high, even in an 900-year event. And in that case, usually buildings survive a 3-foot or lower wave. I don't know about a building, unreinforced masonry building built in 1940 something, but the part of the structure they're going into was built in the 70s at least. And looking through the building file, it didn't seem like there's something wrong per se, but we do know that upgrades are needed to make this safe enough for the new occupancy class that it's changing occupancy type because of the hazardous material.
Well, and they are going to make those upgrades as part of this project, though, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So we have a condition requiring the building permit and change in occupancy. And as that, they're going to have to do some big upgrades to the building.
And I would assume the California Building Code, will have some guidance too on how to treat these tanks and, fire safety and stuff like that. I'm thinking about cannabis businesses, there's a lot of regulation for volatile. This is volatile, it's, gas. So I'm assuming there's something similar. I also had a question about the spill prevention, control, and countermeasure plan. Do you guys have any information on what is included in that? I know it's a county process, but do they talk about things like earthquakes, and measures for that as part of the plan?
Yeah, I'm gonna defer this to Kristen. I don't know if the county does require that they analyze earthquakes and tsunamis, but I do know that they do require a very detailed SPCC. And I did speak with the county prior to the meeting, and they don't require that until they're about to occupy the facility.
If I may,
Do we have, let me see,
my name is David Ringstrom. I am the applicant.
okay, David, we'll go ahead and give you the floor.
The SBCC, we currently have an SBCC for our Jacobs Avenue location. They are site specific. We have a environmental engineer company that actually, with the PE stamp, that actually takes care of that for us, and they'll come on site and develop a plan specific to that location. Generally speaking, SBCCs do not address specifically seismic or tsunami. I know you had spoken earlier about uh, adding a tsunami plan as part of the conditional use, and to me that seems completely reasonable to do. And a variety of our facilities in the state, having gone through seismic events, I can only speak to how everything fared based on history. Um, and if we wanted to get more specific to a seismic event, I'm sure data is out there to be able to gather on how totes, drums, pails, kegs all survive a variety of seismic events. And the 3-inch berm we spoke of earlier, that's something we added to our location up on Jacobs Avenue as part of the requirements on the Above Ground Petroleum Storage Act, otherwise known as APSA, part of SBCC, on what it has to contain. And without having the math in front of me, because I did the math on that, it is actually containing roughly 4 times what's needed, what's required with that 3-inch angle on there, angle iron.
Thank you for the additional input, Mr. Ringstrom. Well, let's bring it back to the commission, and is there a motion, a slide with a motion? I see it in the report, but.
Would you like to make it and add something about the timing of the tsunami hazard plan? It sounds
Yes.
like you said that it was required already.
And it's already required, but it's not required in advance. So that would be one tweak. And it sounds like Mr. Ringstrom is also amenable to having a tsunami safety plan in advance. So that's one upgrade that we might add to this motion as a condition of approval. Is just that be brought forward early in the process. We could ask to see it before we approve this, but I'd be happy with just seeing it, having staff address that and have it be brought forward early in the process.
I'd be supportive, of requiring it earlier, but just at staff's discretion to review and approve it.
Okay. Would you like to make a motion that includes that?
Do you want me to make the
Yes,
motion?
yes,
Okay,
please.
I'll make
Let's
the
hear
motion.
the
Okay. I move the Planning Commission hold a public hearing and adopt a resolution finding the project is exempt from CEQA and conditionally approving the petroleum and petroleum product storage use at 3530 Broadway, APN 007092016, with the condition that the tsunami hazards report be presented to staff prior to issuance of the building permit and, found acceptable to staff.
I'll second that motion. Any additional conversation among commissioners? Okay, let's move it to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. Congratulations. Thank you for doing business in Eureka.
Thank you all.
Yeah, so do I need to make a motion to make agenda modification? So we're gonna move right to item H, new business. The CIP 2023, primarily for Hillficker Lane. Yeah, thank you. And then we'll come back and revisit the draft bylaws afterwards. So we've got a lot of attachments and a staff report available for this update as well. Go ahead, thank you.
Hi, good evening, Commissioners. Caitlin Castellano, Senior Planner. I'm presenting the 2023 CIP. So each year, the Planning Commission is required to review new projects in the CIP, that stands for Capital Improvement Program, for consistency with the general plan and with the land use plan for projects located in the coastal zone. Public Works Engineering is responsible for preparing the CIP, and as each year passes, completed projects are removed from the CIP list. So only one new project is proposed this year, which is located in the Elk River Wastewater Treatment Plant. And it will increase the increase secondary treatment capacity and provide primary effluent equalization storage to eliminate bypass as required by the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. A more detailed project description is included in the staff report. So since this year's project is located within the coastal zone, consistency must be found with the adopted and certified land use plan portion of the local coastal program. Therefore, the Planning Commission must determine whether the project conforms with the goals and policies of the land use plan, known as the LUP, and forward a recommendation and any comments to the City Council. So here's a suggested motion. We'll stop screen sharing, but City Engineer Jesse Willer is available for questions if I can't answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Planner Castellano, for that brief report and this important work of doing the CIP for the Elk River Wastewater Treatment Plan. Are there any immediate questions from the Commission? I have no questions on this one. So let's move it to the general public. Is there anyone in the general public wishing to comment on this?
There's nobody on Zoom and nobody in our audience.
I see. I see. Nobody cares about the sewage. Oh, come on. It's the good stuff. All right. I did hear additional capacity for secondary treatment, and is there any vision for turning our wastewater? Go ahead, Jesse Willer. You can come forward. Is there any opportunity to increase secondary and even add tertiary treatment, much like the city of Arcata has done? Is there any idea that we might model that as a city in some future horizon?
Yeah, so that's the part of this. The first phase that we're looking at here is studying how we can increase our secondary capacity so that we don't, so we can eliminate bypassing that during really large events that come along with large stormwater events. So large storms. Currently, that's the plan, is to eliminate that in the next probably 4 years or so, to get outside of bypassing any longer. As far as tertiary is concerned, it's regulatorily challenging, and I think Arcata has some challenges with their marsh system just due to the way the regional board monitors their limits and how those work. So we are looking at some. With this project, it could allow us to look at some work in the overflow marsh. We have an overflow marsh that's associated with wastewater treatment plant that we use during these events so that we don't discharge this water directly in the bay without getting adequate treatment on it. With having adequate secondary treatment, we may be able to bring that overflow marsh and restore it back to a more of a functional marsh that could be eventually connected in with the adjacent Elk River estuary, but that's kind of a much more long-term project that we haven't fully gotten into. It's just one of those opportunities that comes along with this. So there is certainly some additional marsh that could be created out there. And then tertiary treatment wise, we are still looking at options as to what we could do there outside of what we already do for disinfection at the plant. So it's being thought of, but the natural, I wouldn't say it's off the table, but there's certainly not a straightforward plan right now that we have a vision for.
And our understanding is that that's not part of this current CIP, just some expansion of secondary treatment is proposed under this CIP.
Yeah, so this one would be, right, so we would expand our secondary treatment capacity so that we would not have any bypassing flows and any longer, and so we'd get that full secondary treatment.
Jesse Wheeler, we don't get you often at the stand, so I'm going to ask a different question just because I'm curious. What's your level of concern about the wastewater plant relative to tsunami hazard and everything else that we're talking about tonight, and low or medium or high? Or
So we've recently done some study of our city infrastructure in regards to sea level rise adaptation. Planning wise, we were actually at the last council meeting and introduced that plan to council. So as far as sea level rise is concerned, we've definitely, we've done our first foray into looking into what, how different levels of sea level rise, including wave run up and different inundation pathways, would affect our infrastructure along the coastline based on different, projections out into the future, different timeframes. So what we see with our wastewater treatment plant is that when it was originally constructed, they built it very high in elevation. So it actually, if you look at the elevations, you guys, I heard earlier when you were talking about the tsunami discussion, and its elevation is high enough that we don't even look at it in the near term when it comes to sea level rise, because it's so much higher than everything else around it. It's built very high in elevation, let alone the structures that are there being also up in elevation. So I'm less concerned about the treatment plant. And then as far as tsunami, I think if you look at where the tsunami zone is and where the elevation of our plant is, it would kind of be an island. If a tsunami were to flood into the area, it wouldn't necessarily overtop into that area, just due to of course, if it was an event larger than what the tsunami zone, kind of shows elevation wise, then that could be different. But that's my general take on it.
Just to add to that, the CDP, the coastal development permit they got for it in the 80s specifically called for it to be elevated above the tsunami hazard zone and the flood zone. That's why it's elevated so high.
Thank you for that additional information. Any other questions for Jesse or other staff? Okay, I'd be interested in hearing a motion.
Since we don't need to condition this one, I can actually make a motion on this. I move the Planning Commission adopt a resolution finding CIP 2023 is exempt from CEQA and is in conformance with the city's adopted land use plan, and forward our recommendation to adopt CIP 2023 to the City Council, along with any commissioner or public comments.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Let's put it to a vote. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? None. Abstentions? None. So moved. Thank you for your hard work on that. Okay, we're going to go back in the agenda to old business, G1 draft bylaws. And are you wanting just to receive comment on this, or is there going to be a presentation related to the draft bylaws?
So you had asked for us to bring it back to you at this meeting from the last one.
Yep.
With updates to references to gender that were in it.
Yep.
And so I went through it and made those changes. Also added in some information since we have the new regulations about Zoom going forward, kind of how to handle that. And I think that's my report for you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I read through it and saw the non-gendered language, just striking of many of that, and also some comments about when the chambers would be opened up as well. So you caught everything that I heard from the commission. So I appreciate that. I don't have any further comments on the bylaws. Any other commissioners?
I do have a quick question on Zoom, and I apologize if I missed this in the written communications, but my reading of, from a practical standpoint, commissioners will need to be in the room all or most of the time. Does that apply to the public, or will the public still be able to engage via Zoom? Are we staying hybrid for input and questions and that kind of thing?
So yes, decision makers have to be in the room unless they're using the emergency claim or the just cause claim. And those are limited to just being able to use those a couple of times a year. Staff, the public, anybody else who wants to tune in can either do so in person or via Zoom. So the limitation is just for decision makers.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on then to director's reports and communications.
Mr. Chairman or Vice Chairman, we need to have a motion to
there
adopt
needs to
these,
be a
please.
motion for this one.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm happy to make a motion. Do we comment? Okay. Can we open the public comment and then close the public comment?
Yes, yeah. Let's open public comment. Seeing nobody here to comment, let's close public comment and move right to motions.
I don't have the motion in front of me, but I'm happy to make it. Would there be a way to? Oh wait, I think I just found it. Give me 1 second.
It would just be a motion to adopt the bylaws as amended.
Okay, I move to update the bylaws as amended.
Second.
Any further discussion? None. Let's go right to vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none, and abstentions, none. So moved. Thank you for that work.
Thank you.
And then we're moving now into director's reports and communications. And we do have an agenda item. It's session 5 of our coastal land use plan update document. This has been riveting and wonderful, and I personally asked for this to be put off until this time where we had a smaller agenda and had more time to listen to it as opposed to the packed agenda that we had it on last time. So thank you for the deferment, and we're ready to hear that now.
Great. Yep. This is our 5th and final review session for the first draft of the LUP comprehensive update, which we're proposing as a new coastal element of the 2040 general plan. And just as a recap, any inland actions will need to be consistent with the entire 2040 general plan except for this LUP. Coastal development permits, they just are, the standard of review is just going to be the LUP. And for other coastal actions, the whole 2040 general plan will apply. And we're proposing the coastal element or LUP have 6 chapters. You all started review in September. And since then, have reviewed all the chapters except for the hazards chapter along with the applicable glossary terms. And the next step will be to incorporate all the edits received from Planning Commission and City Council and post a new draft online. And we're already started working on the coastal zoning code update. And I anticipate bringing some of that forward for you guys to review, you all to review sometime soon, maybe next month. The draft coastal hazards chapter includes 5 sections, and the first section is a catch-all that includes policies that apply to more than one hazard type, while the other sections are hazard specific. And tonight I'm just going to talk more broadly about sea level rise instead of going over all the policies. About a year ago, Planning Commission received a report on sea level rise, and so some of this is recap on that. The Coastal Commission currently considers the best available science on sea level rise to be this Ocean Protection Council sea level rise guidance document from last updated in 2018. And it includes sea level rise projections specific to the North Spit tide gauge that account for local vertical land motion. And this is what the chart in the guidance document looks like for the North Spit. It includes a likely range of sea level rise scenarios that says by 2040, there's a 66% probability of the sea level rising somewhere between 0.7 and 1.1 feet at the North Spit tide gauge. They've labeled the upper range of this likely projection as the low risk aversion scenario. The table also includes a 1 in 200 chance column, which says that by 2040, there is a 0.5% chance sea level rise will meet or exceed 1.6 feet. And they've labeled that projection, that 0.5% probability, the medium high risk aversion. So the low risk and medium high risk aversion scenarios are the numbers included in the draft coastal zone hazard chapter. In talking about sea level rise, it helps to start by understanding current tidal levels. The mean monthly maximum water is currently 8.8 feet on Humboldt Bay elevation. Those are tides associated with storms and king tides. So if you're flooded by mean annual maximum water, you're flooded about 4 times per year. Mean monthly maximum water is an average monthly highest tide, and it's currently 7.7 feet. This water elevation occurs approximately once a month. And then mean higher high water is 6.5 feet. It's the daily average high tide, and it occurs every 1 to 2 days. So you'll notice the average king tide is about a foot above monthly average high tide, and monthly average high tide is about a foot over daily average. So with 1.1 feet of sea level rise, the king tides of today start to occur once a month, and with another 1.2 feet of sea level rise, the king tides of today become a daily occurrence. And that first foot is expected to occur within the planning period for the 2040 general plan. And then the additional up to 2.3 feet is projected to occur sometime between 2050 and 2080. So there are 2 key Coastal Act policies when addressing hazards. Coastal Act 30253 says new development shall minimize risk to life and property in high-risk areas and assure stability and structural integrity, and neither create nor contribute significantly to erosion, geologic instability, or destruction of the site or surrounding area, or in any way require the construction of protective devices that would substantially alter natural landforms along bluffs and cliffs. And it's important to note that this policy prevents the construction of shoreline protective devices only where it would alter natural landforms along bluffs and cliffs. And 30235 is the other policy, and it says shoreline protective devices shall be permitted when required to serve coastal dependent uses or to protect existing structures or beaches in danger from erosion. So it's considered an override policy, allowing shoreline protective devices for certain types of development, even when they're inconsistent with other policies of the Coastal Act. And the Coastal Commission, one of the things that it provides protection for existing structures, and the Coastal Commission believes this is referring to structures in existence prior to the adoption of the Coastal Act in 1976, while many local jurisdictions assert this means any existing structure. So while the Coastal Act only has a couple of policies related to hazards, the Coastal Commission has put out a lot of guidance explaining the types of policies they want to see in local coastal programs. And their guidance document breaks sea level rise adaptation into 3 general strategies. There's retreat, where you remove development from hazardous areas and you keep new construction from happening in those areas. Accommodate is where you're modifying your development to decrease hazard risk, such as through elevation, like this house in King Salmon. And then protection is where you're employing some sort of structure to defend the shoreline in place without changing your development that you're protecting. And protection strategies can further be divided into hard and soft armoring. Soft armoring refers to the use of natural features like beaches, dune systems, and wetlands to buffer coastal areas. And this last picture shows a hybrid approach using both soft and hard armoring to defend in place. The Coastal Commission policy guidance discourages hard protection because it causes coastal squeeze. So when hard structures are used to protect backshore development, they become barriers that fix the back of the shoreline, that impede the ability of beaches and habitats to naturally migrate inland. So because they can't migrate inland, they'll eventually be squeezed or lost, caught between the tides and the immovable shoreline structure. This is a big environmental justice issue in beach communities where hard armoring is used to protect vacation homes for the wealthy and results in the loss of beach access for the general public. And luckily in Eureka, we don't have beach fronting development where there's this conflict with public access. We actually use our armoring or levees for shoreline access that we wouldn't otherwise have. But we do have the issue that coastal squeeze could result in the loss of vulnerable intertidal habitats like salt marsh. And that would be bad for the health of the bay and for our adaptive capacity, because salt marsh is really good at attenuating wave energy. Hard armoring is also a problem because it causes erosion, which results in the need for more hard armoring, which causes more erosion, and it's just this feedback loop. And it's not the complete solution because of the need to drain stormwater runoff. And if your development is lower than the tides, you can't gravity drain stormwater anymore. And you might actually have tidal water coming up through your storm drains, which is what is happening in this picture in Fields Landing. Also, if you have really high groundwater, which we do, it could eventually get pushed up to the point where it's flooding the surface. So when the Coastal Commission permits a new structure along the shoreline, we talked about this about a year ago, they prohibit reliance on shoreline armoring, and they require that the structure be elevated to be safe from flooding over its anticipated life. And so for a new, commercial or residential structure, they would say the projected life needs to be at least 75 years from now, and we need to be using a medium high risk aversion scenario, which is 6.3 to 7.6 feet of sea level rise, which is a huge amount of elevation, especially if you're dealing with a place like Jacobs Avenue, which is already below sea level in some places. So a number of LCP updates, local coastal program updates, have failed in recent years over deep disagreement between the Coastal Commission and the local jurisdiction over sea level rise hazard policies. And the disagreements mainly focus on when shoreline armoring is allowed. So in order for this new land use plan update to take effect, it must be certified by the Coastal Commission. And in reviewing the document, the Commission has three choices. They can certify the document as submitted, they can deny certification, or they can deny certification as submitted but approve it if the city adopts edits that they propose, and they call them suggested modifications. And this third situation, our only options really are to adopt every single one of the Commission's edits verbatim or start over. And so there's no room at that point for negotiation, and we lose control over the language. So the overall goal in writing this draft hazard chapter was to write policies strong enough to make it hard for the Coastal Commission staff to justify making edits through suggested modifications. So, for instance, with the shoreline protection policies, we propose draft policy language, which includes Coastal Act 30253 verbatim. To be clear, shoreline protection is only prohibited along bluffs and cliffs. And also have a policy that says shoreline armoring is allowed if it is consistent with all policies of the land use plan. We also included a policy allowing protection temporarily in cases where critical infrastructure is threatened and there is an immediate public health and safety concern, which is something discussed in the Coastal Commission's guidance on critical infrastructure adaptation. we've seen when the commission writes policies through suggested mods, they may just say that, no armoring. All armoring is prohibited for new development. So we're proposing something that's consistent with the Coastal Act, but allows more flexibility. So the commission wants new development to be designed to be safe from sea level rise over its anticipated life. So we included language indicating this, but saying that it's not always appropriate and feasible, and that in some cases we might design differently in the short term, not to cover the full design life. And our hope is the Coastal Commission will allow this if we only issue a temporary authorization and require future adaptation planning and acknowledgement from the applicant that future removal of the development may be necessary. And this is something the Coastal Commission has been doing with their own applicants, like Caltrans and the 101 corridor. And we also tried to build some flexibility into policies to address unique contexts. So for instance, there's a typical LCP policy added by the commission requiring removal of shoreline protective devices if they're no longer necessary. But we added a caveat that removal is only required if in fact the shoreline protection is causing adverse impacts and if there's no greater coastal resource benefit to leaving it in place. Thinking forward to adding hybrid shoreline protection with ecological benefits, we'll want this flexibility in the future. And there's also a typical policy requiring site-specific hazard reports for all development, and we added a caveat that this requirement would not be necessary if there's already information available for the site at a level of detail adequate to ensure compliance, with the hope that at some point we're already working towards having area-wide hazard analysis, like there was a detailed study for Jacobs Avenue, so that each individual applicant wouldn't have to do their own hazard analysis. So we're not calling for reliance on shoreline armoring in any one area because we don't think we're at that point yet where we have detailed enough planning to succeed with the Coastal Commission on that, but we do indicate we are working towards a coordinated approach to get away from inefficient parcel by parcel analysis. And, as City Engineer Willer was saying, the Public Works Engineering just released a CIP adaptation plan that they presented at the last City Council meeting to do that. And the last two slides were just stuff that's in the works for sea level rise planning for the city, which I'm happy to share if you're interested, but I'll just end there for now.
I'd be interested.
Okay.
I mean, no need to take 20 minutes on it, but I'd be curious.
Okay. So, the city has funded this a detailed vulnerability assessment and climate readiness plan for our wastewater collection and treatment system that is really detailed and looks, beyond just the bathtub model. It looks at what might happen with the Elk River spit and the Elk River and fluvial changes and all sorts of details. And then we have done a lot of work on our wastewater collection system recently, which is more vulnerable than our treatment plant. There's actually parts of our collection system that are very vulnerable. And so we had an inflow infiltration reduction project, and we've installed backup batteries and new pumps at some of our vulnerable lift stations. And then the CIP adaptation plan, basically draft policy 4.15 is in line with what they're doing. And then we're working on permitting for this large west side stormwater drainage adaptation project to improve the capacity of our stormwater drainage system, including many of the measures discussed in policy 4.18. And then This wasn't done necessarily with sea level rise in mind, but the fact that the city owns a lot of the land along the shoreline is huge for our adaptive capacity. Also, all the work we've done and continue to do to restore wetlands, like the upcoming First Slough Restoration Project, is huge. And any work we do to prioritize and evaluate and clean up contaminated sites. And something I just learned is that our public works department goes out during king tides for the last couple of years and documents 40 different locations along our coastline or bayfront, and monitors change over time, which is also important. So those are the projects.
Thank you for that summary report, Principal Planner Kenyon, and for 5 different sessions with us of bringing us along one at a time. It's been bite-sizable and very valuable for us. Comments from commissioners?
I had a couple policies I was hoping we could just dig into in a bit more detail. I don't necessarily have concerns with any of them. I just wanted to hear more about staff's thinking on them. The first one was CZH 1.4 assumption of risk. And I'm wondering if for, each of these we could just maybe share it on the screen or, basically have just a little bit of an explanation about it.
Sure, yeah. So this is something recommended by the Coastal Commission that we include in coastal development permits for new development in hazardous areas. Assumption of risk condition that basically says that the applicant acknowledges and assumes the coastal hazard risks that they're going to be subject to, and doesn't hold us liable. And then also, the second one is about agreeing that the permit does not authorize otherwise unauthorized encroachment onto public trust lands when development is located on or near the shoreline. There's the public trust doctrine limits allowable uses on public trust lands to things that are coastal related and in the public interest, like public access. And so there's a concern about with sea level rise that people's development that was once on private land becomes subject to the tides. Is it now on public trust land? Because the mean high tide line is the divider. But in Eureka, there's a lot of former tidelands that still have a public trust interest on them. So that's why it's written as otherwise unauthorized encroachment, because there's all sorts of development on land that still retains a public trust in Eureka. And then agreement the development does not have any rights entitlement to shoreline protection when the development is not entitled to shoreline protection. So that's something we already have been putting in some of our coastal development permits on the shoreline, is not that you can't have it, but you're not entitled to it. And then in the case that when development may not remain safe from hazards. So these are letter D is for projects that aren't being designed for their full medium high risk aversion over their full anticipated life. They have to acknowledge and agree that the development may require future adaptation up to and including removal of the site improvements. So if you're not willing up front to elevate 7 feet, you have to just acknowledge that and agree to that you might have to remove things in the future.
It's interesting that they're given that option. That's kind of nice in a way. I did notice that there were a couple places where it seemed like it was we'll authorize it now, but we might come knocking later. And I'm assuming that if the Coastal Commission adopts this, the city would have that discretionary authority, not the Coastal Commission. right? I mean, or would coastal staff be keeping an eye out and sending the city letters asking for enforcement actions?
Yeah, the Coastal Commission has a right to enforce our local coastal program if we fail to. So they could do that. I'm sure they're going to be very busy in the future with all the shoreline retreat. And they also act as us on appeal. And if they find a substantial issue and take an appeal up, then they act on it de novo. So they make their own decision as to whether it's consistent with our LCP.
But that would only be like immediately after a project hearing, right? So if it was 10 years down the line, like they couldn't appeal it to themselves unless there was like some trigger for that. I'm just wondering, you know, it seems like we're building in these opportunities to come back to the drawing board, but I'm just wondering if it would be staff doing that or the Coastal Commission or both. And it kind of sounds like it could be either.
I foresee more limited term authorization coastal development permits where you have to come back in for a new coastal development permit in X number of years, and then you'd be back up for review. And it could be appealable to the Coastal Commission.
That's
Yeah.
a yucky thought.
I know. I mean, I'm sure, you know, it'll be fine. But I actually did have a question.
Just because we don't know how much sea level rise is going to occur. So
Right.
it's, you know, if in 20 years we've only had a foot of sea level rise, if all the ice, like the, you know, if everything's melted and we have this worst case scenario, then it's going to be a different situation.
7 meters of sea level rise if we lose terrestrial ice on Greenland, for example. Yeah.
But it sounds like it would be the cities, like the city would put the time limit on the CDP.
Correct.
So, I mean, we would be the ones being like, you have to come back in 15 years. It's not like the Coastal Commission would do that. Okay. So the next one I had questions about was CZH 2.4, Geologic Hazard Report, if it's okay.
Yeah, Principal Planner Kenyon, would you mind bringing up so we can see it on the screen as well, just following it CZH by CZH?
It's the draft document, which was the first attachment to the. It's not in the. It's attached to the agenda.
And I guess maybe while Principal Planner Getz is bringing that one up, I feel I had written this down. I think you did kind of speak to this a little bit in your presentation about requiring a report unless information is already available for this site at a level of detail adequate to ensure project compliance with the LCP. So it sounds like what that might look like is if there's sort of like a more regional report that's been done already, like for Jacobs Avenue. I was just kind of curious in what circumstance people would be required or not required to prepare a report.
Yeah. Sorry, just a second. It's under 2022 city, if you want to go to the project folder and then draft document. Yeah, I was thinking either in a situation where a detailed hazard analysis had been done at a more area-wide level that covered the site, which is something that we could potentially get grant funding for as the city, because there's a lot of funding right now for sea level rise planning. I was thinking potentially like the northern waterfront where we really want redevelopment. That could be something that could streamline redevelopment. Or in a situation where, you might need a CDP for a fence. There's certain really small developments that trigger the need for a coastal development permit. And so this language says if there's already enough information available at a level of detail adequate to ensure compliance with the LCP, you can make an argument that you don't need any more detail to determine that the fence is going to be not a problem.
Yeah, that's great. And that was kind of my thought too, is it seems like it's very... like it's a big blanket that would cover a lot of projects to require most things to get a geologic and soils report, but it sounds like there's some built-in discretion. So that's good to hear. So that was my only question on that one.
I originally had it that you just had to get it if you were in a liquefaction area. and then we changed it to anywhere because everywhere in the coastal zone is pretty. I mean, we don't have any active faults in Eureka, which is nice compared to Arcata, but we have still really big seismic events with serious ground disturbance. So,
Yeah, and I think a lot of the, lands to the west of the highway were built on like fill or like literal trash. So definitely it's not a bad idea. But yeah, in Arcata, we do tie it to liquefaction. So I was curious about that. Okay, and then the last one, CGH 4.4, about significant shoreline hazards. There's some language in here about, what I was just curious to know what constitutes a significant shoreline hazard. I'm sure you kind of left it high level, so there could be more, talked about in the code, but I was just curious to discuss that one. So that's CZH 4.4.
yeah, you're asking why it says significant shoreline hazards.
Yeah, or what would constitute a significant shoreline hazard?
Good question. The current policy says significant shoreline hazards, so that's why we kept it there. The key to this is I want it to only apply immediately along the shoreline, because it's a report that looks at when you're further inland, it's flooding, and you know what the issue is. When you're on the immediate shoreline, you're dealing with wave run up, and it's an erosion, and it's just more complicated. So it's a situation where you need this sort of site specific report to look at how your specific shoreline is being affected. So I can't think of a shoreline property that doesn't have significant shoreline hazards.
I've noticed that there are areas on the Eureka waterfront that have more wind fetch. There's just more open bay, and so larger waves are able to be generated that hit the shoreline, whereas immediately across from Woodley Island, for example, there's not a lot of fetch.
Right.
So we don't get big waves, but immediately past either end of that, we get much bigger waves.
Like the new trail segment
Yeah.
in South Eureka. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess my only other question is, the project that we heard earlier tonight, is there anything proposed in this policy that would have been applied in terms of like potential hazardous materials that was not applied because this is new policy? Like, would this have changed anything about staff's recommendation or conditions for the project?
That's a good question. I haven't read through these policies to think through how that project would apply. Right now, for tsunamis, we aren't requiring, anything beyond what the building code requires in terms of structural mitigation. It's all life safety mitigation. It's like making sure people can get out of the area. And then one of the general policies talks about not trying to avoid citing stuff that would cause a significant increase in hazard risk or something like that. The building code right now for tsunamis just requires like type 3 and 4 occupancies I don't know. Type 3 and 4, it's like essential and critical facilities have to be designed for not just any tsunami. It's the 2,475 year event. It's an insane tsunami. And so something to consider is whether you might want other types of facilities that are not essential or critical to also have some sort of structural mitigation for tsunamis, maybe for like a lesser tsunami, or in situations where you might get a larger than 3-foot wave flow depth or something like that. We didn't put it in here. I'm hoping that guidance from CGS comes out, and that'll be helpful to us in revising this further. But for instance, in Samoa, out there, the Coastal Commission, when they certified their plan, they required, I think, all habitable space to be designed for the to withstand the design event tsunami. So those new multifamily projects out there are supposed to be like that. It's something to think about. Tsunamis are tough because they're really low probability, high risk. So our minds have trouble figuring out how to deal with that kind of risk situation.
I once really annoyed a geologist by asking them asteroid question. They say, "Why do you always ask the asteroid question? Kiss your butt goodbye. You're probably not safe at Lord Ellis. Just live with it."
Cool. Well, thanks for thinking through those. That was it for me.
Okay, you gave us an extra month, so I have 7 comments.
Okay.
And I have them written if you want them, later. They're short comments. But first, I just want to make a general comment. I'm just really impressed with staff.
Yeah.
I mean, the job that you've done in this, LUP and this chapter in particular, looking at all the coastal hazards, is very thorough. And I've noted, as someone who's on Cal Poly Humboldt's, Sea Level Rise Institute, and hearing from engineers and scientists about this, you haven't dropped a step, on this. And Principal Planner Ken and you in particular, I feel like you really dove into this, looked at what other cities are doing, looking at what state guidelines are, and looking at policies and seeing how it applies specifically to our landscape. I just think you've done a really great job, and I really appreciate it. I think it's going to pay off dividends for future staffs and future people at this commission. So I just want to thank you for that. Another just general comment is sometimes with the hazard section is you've subdivided the hazard sort of by type. But we know in the real world we get sort of double and triple disturbance. And so it was just a general comment. When I looked at this, I saw things really, I didn't see a lot of places for, where for example, we have severe storms, and then how they have a nexus with landslides in the steepest parts of the greenways and gulches, for example. Just like there were a few things that I can imagine scenarios that were part of something and part of another thing. So geologic hazards, but severe storm, and hydrologic hazards, and looking at geomorphic hazards in the, in the gulches, and and also looking at severe storms and some of the high wind gusts that we get here, and wind throw, and so sometimes storms with wind, and then our forest resources, there can be higher levels of hazard. And so just sort of thinking about, I don't have a specific suggestion coming out of this, but it's just a general comment to look for those areas where there's crossover in these hazards, and where one hazard plus another hazard creates a slightly higher magnitude of hazard, and just to think about it in those terms as well. And I don't know if this could be in some additional comments or chapter, or it might just create more robust interaction between the chapters. But there's a few places where I just wondered where that would be best placed, some of those double and triple disturbances in this document.
Yeah, I was thinking, under evaluation of risk, we could talk about considering like cascading and cumulative risk.
Right. Yeah, that would be a good place. Yeah, so that's just a general comment. I don't have anything specific. You should do this or you should do that.
Okay.
But I'll get to those other comments. So I'm going to start at, this is page 5.7, and it's the figure, the LUP 5.4 tsunami hazard zone, and it's a map that has all the pink. if it's easier to slide through it that way, and it's a wonderful map, and I guess what I would want as a person living in Eureka, it's like, okay, here's where tsunamis are likely to come. What it doesn't really show me is areas of differential risk, really. And it's, there's sort of one tsunami hazard zone, and there's nothing really pulled up like this area is like Jacobs Avenue is particularly at risk, or we heard from Jesse Wheeler that our sewage treatment plant isn't particularly at risk, and maybe I'm missing it in here, but it would be interesting to have some at least public infrastructure that we feel is really highly at risk. I just think that citizens might want to know.
Right. And when those flow depth maps are available, we should add one, because they show how the big a depth. This map was created in conjunction with Cal OES, and it's more focused on evacuation in mind. So it's really conservative, and it's just like, if you're in this area, get out during a tsunami. And that was really the point of this map. And so CGS is working on these new maps that are going to be more focused on, building in the tsunami zone. And so once we have that and it's publicly available, that I agree, we should add the flow depth map to show relative risk.
And maybe some call outs of some areas that are of particular risk that also have particular hazard, to the public. I know that the Humboldt Bay Generating Station, and particularly the Independent Spent Nuclear Fuel Storage Installation Facility, also called ISFSI, I can barely say it, ISFSI, is what they call ISFSI, is not, it's that area where it exists is on this map, but it's something that's not called out. And the only reason that I would be interested in seeing that is it's one of these things that a lot of folks just think that went away in 1980 when the plant was decommissioned, and don't realize that we're at increasing risk for those nuclear spent rods, 67 tons of them. In a tsunami-like event, we could have a Fukushima-like scenario here. And it just seems like certain items like that might be well placed on a map just to remind people of hazard.
Mapping of the critical infrastructure.
And a place not to go. Or to stay away from, possibly as well. That's all I have to say about that one. My next comment is page 5.9. Let me pull it up. And it's the sea level rise section, the last paragraph. Yeah, so down near the bottom of the page. So in the table, so North Spit Tigers table LUP 5.2, these projections consider the combined effects of regional eustatic sea level rise and vertical land motion. It's a perfectly good sense. But I would like to see just a better definition of vertical land motion. Perhaps it could just say, e.g., subsidence and uplift, so that people know that land motion goes both ways around here, that we have subsidence from having cut off former tidelands from the tide, so the sponge is dried somewhat, and we have areas of uplift, and our coast is quite almost crenulated, or almost like corrugated fiberglass, where we have areas of uplift and subsidence almost just within a quarter mile of each other. So we're differentially impacted by sea level rise depending on where we are on our coast. So that was the only suggestion, is maybe just define vertical land motion, just adding, e.g. subsidence and uplift. It's a small point, but just something to make it so that people see it goes both ways. Page 512 is the next comment. And it's paragraph 1. Shoreline structures, yeah. So perhaps the term shoreline protective devices is something that you're trying to imitate from what the Coastal Commission uses. It's a very awkward term for me. I mean, I think of a device as, this, it's some small manufactured, mechanical or electronic instrument, a spark arrestor, my cell phone, devices. It's just an odd word for me when I think about what we're really looking at is shoreline protection or shoreline protective measures or shoreline protective hardscape and softscape. It's just devices is odd. But I get now that you're trying to be consistent and you don't want to bring up red flags to the Coastal Commission. It's just an odd term.
We can change it if we think it's odd.
It's throughout. I mean, I don't know if it reads that way to anyone else. When we're talking about protective devices, we're not thinking about marshes. A marsh isn't a device that we, when we're looking at buffer zones of strands and living shorelines and marshes as part of our buffer, it's not necessarily a constructed device. It's something that exists out there, and it's part of our first and second levels of protection for sea level rise. And so, I would much rather see shoreline protection or shoreline protective measures than shoreline protective devices. It just reads more true for me, as opposed to just things that we build as if it's some device.
Well, I think that, I don't have a strong feeling about it one way or the other, but I think that the shoreline protective devices, it's defined here, are constructed features. So they're supposed to be specifically like structures, objects, and I feel like conflating it with measures might not be totally accurate. But
I could use the dichotomy of hard shoreline protective measures versus soft shoreline protective measures.
Yes.
And I think that could get at it without using the word device.
Yeah, and if you want devices, to be somewhere in here for consistency, maybe inclusion in the glossary, being like, this, when we say this, it's supposed to be, consistent with this as used in Coastal Act.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and it says it later, shoreline protection in paragraph 4, vary along a spectrum from hard shoreline protective devices to natural solutions, and then it includes tidal marshes and levees with transitional ecotone, habitat, oyster reefs, dunes, etc. So it's explained later, but it's okay. I'm not saying you have to change it, but it just seems odd to me. Paragraph 4 says natural and nature-based shorelines. Living shorelines is a piece of terminology that's really being forwarded in the engineering and ecology community. And so it just seems natural and nature-based living shorelines. It might be worthwhile just to add that word living in paragraph 4.
And I think living shorelines is in one of the policies. I feel like it's referenced,
Yeah, honestly, I struggled with what to call what. So I'm happy for guidance.
Then page 519. That's my next comment, and getting down to the last of them here. And this is CZH 5.8. Wait. Oh,
I don't
no,
think
there
there is
isn't
one.
one.
Yeah.
My suggestion is that we make one.
Oh.
Okay, thank you. And again, it seems like we might consider adding CZH 5.8. It's similar to known areas of hazard, but maybe actually call out known area of nuclear material storage hazard. And a brief description of the spent fuel rod storage and its vulnerability to sea level rise and liquefaction and everything else that we're talking about, since it's outside of city limits, but it's something that would impact everybody.
But what would the policy be? Because we don't control it. It's not in city limits. It's not in our LCP jurisdiction. And I don't know where it goes if it gets released. So what is the guidance we're giving people about it?
Right. For me, it was just that it be in here educationally, that we see that it's there and that it may require some kind of multi-hazard mitigation collaboration with federal,
Got it.
State, and county. It's not so much, I'm not trying to put it make it our responsibility, because the truth is we're not even allowed to, only federal hands can touch the nuclear materials. It doesn't belong even to PG&E. They're just caretakers of it.
So we can, something about encouraging them to deal with it.
Yeah.
Or maybe to not just like support them doing stuff, but like, on city, hazard maps, make sure that it's identified, like that kind of educational thing, like
Educate people about it.
Yeah,
I
like-
think that's the right. Your earlier suggestion, your take now. I think that's the right place for that.
like acknowledge the existence and potential impact of this storage, and find ways to continue to educate Eureka residents about its existence and how to respond in case of disaster, kind of thing like that, including placement on city maps, etc.
Yeah, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Okay. Does that conclude that director's reports and communications? I think it does. So other reports and communication. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Whether
Michael.
this is the previous agenda item or other reports and communications, I think it'd be worth taking 60 seconds to get a briefing on the recent Coastal Commission meeting, because Eureka had a couple wins there. And I have a parochial reason for tracking on one of them, but Principal Planner Getz, why don't you tell the group here?
So on Friday, February 10th, so last Friday, the Coastal Commission certified the cannabis regulations and also the prohibition on new digital signs in the coastal zone. And they did that without any suggested modifications, so both of those amendments are effective now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's great.
it's good.
Yeah. So we're in item J, other reports and communications. Anything else from staff or commissioners?
I'll add just one thing. I am loving the new trail down on the south end of Eureka. My wife and I are making a lunchtime appointment with each other twice a week to walk that trail. So pass that on to the city manager. I know he has a big stake in that.
Maybe just a brief report on the special. No, actually, we saw minutes on the special meeting that already happened, so we don't need to revisit that at this point. Okay.
There is an upcoming special city council meeting you should be aware of on the 28th about encampments, authorized encampments where they're allowed, and other information.
When will that be?
At 5 p.m. on February 28th.
I think it's 5:30, but
We'll send you
we'll send the agenda
when
when
it
it comes
gets
out.
published.
Has the council adopted their priority goals for the year yet?
No.
No? I would love to get just like a brief report on the goals when they come out. I just feel like it's good for the commission to like have a pulse on the council and what their priorities are. I feel like it helps us make decisions.
We can do that, certainly.
I agree.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move right into adjournment.